said, "Why are you so angry with your own people, whom you brought from the land of Egypt with such great power and such a strong hand? Why let the Egyptians say their God rescued them with the evil intention of slaughtering them in the mountains and wiping them from the face of the earth? Turn away from your fierce anger. Change your mind about this terrible disaster you have threatened against your people. Remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You bound yourself with an oath to them, saying, 'I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven, and I will give them all of this land that I have promised to your descendants, and they will possess it forever.' So the Lord changed his mind about this terrible disaster he had threatened to bring down on his people." May God add his blessing to the reading of his word. Well, there's, in the New York Times, they have a routine series with a man they call the ethicist. His name is Kwame Anthony Appiah, and he is a philosopher. And this is kind of like a Dear Abby kind of column. People will write to him about moral or ethical dilemmas that they have in their life, and then he provides them with advice. And so there was a particular one that kind of stuck out to me. It was a woman who wrote to him about her 85-year-old neighbor. And she said the two of them had a very loving and caring relationship. And her 85-year-old neighbor, she said, had faith. She didn't even say what it was. She had faith, and I'm an atheist. And so when we talk, and I share with her what's going on in my life, my 85-year-old neighbor will say to me that she's going to pray for me about that. And she writes, "I told her I don't believe in prayer, so don't pray for me." And she continues every time that I tell her about something to tell me, "I'm going to pray for you about that." She said no matter if it's a conversation in the hall, a text, or an email, she continues to tell me, "I'm going to pray about that." And so she's writing to ask him, what do I do about this? How do I get her to stop praying for me? And she has disrespected my wishes. I've told her what I wanted, and she's not doing what I want. What do I do? So this ethicist, the philosopher, responds this way. He said, I'll paraphrase it and quote some of it, that he's glad, he says, "I'm glad you're honest with each other about your views, and you can share that and be different and still be loving towards one another." He says that's great. But he says, if you don't think the prayers will do you any good, you also must believe that the prayers won't do you any harm. So they're not hurting you. However, your neighbor thinks that you'll be worse off without the prayers, and she's expressed to you that it is her duty, based on her pursuit of following the scriptures, to pray for you. So for her, in her view, it would do you harm to not pray for you. He says the only reason you give for objecting to her prayers is that she has failed to comply with your wishes. He says, but I don't think that means she has treated you with disrespect. You are not entitled to insist that she stop including you in her prayers. He said, what you are entitled to is to tell her to stop telling you about it. He said, instead of trying to get your 85-year-old neighbor to change her ways, I wonder whether you might change yours and learn to accept this woman for who she is, hearing her prayers as a sincere expression of love towards you. Now, that's interesting to me for a couple reasons. One, I actually don't find this to be very common. People who don't believe in prayer are still often very willing to be prayed for. You'll ask them how you can pray for them. They'll still tell you. Most people won't say, well, I don't believe in that, don't do it. They'll still accept it. But even more than that, how amazing would it be to be known as someone who prays so much that it annoys someone. Right? That's an amazing thing. If you could say that at the end of your life, you've accomplished something. I care so much and pray so much about people and bring people to God so often they're annoyed by it. But the truth is, most of us couldn't say that, could we? And if we did, the people who it's true of don't necessarily know about it. And so I want to hold this woman up as a bit of model to us today, because the passage we've read is similar to this. Moses is in the same role as this 85-year-old woman. He is bringing people to God. So if you haven't been with us, we've been studying the book of Exodus, and we are at the point where after God's people have made a covenant commitment with him, and he very elaborately told them what it is that he expects of them in this commitment. Moses, after they make the commitment, they agree to it. Moses goes back up the mountain for 40 days. While he's up there, the people say this is taking too long, and they build a golden calf. And they begin to worship that. God sees that, and what we saw last week is it tells us that God is angered by that. And that anger flows out of his love for them. That he wants them to follow that commitment. He wants them to be committed to them. And the fact that they are so easily, quickly, and willingly violate the commitment that they just made to him hurts him. And that sin in their lives now rightly brings this righteous anger that brings this consequence of judgment that God utters against them. This is Moses' response to hearing that, what we read today. Moses talks back to God. He, in our words, he intercedes for the people. Intercession is when we take someone who either can't or won't come to God, and we stand before God on their behalf. Whatever it is that they need in life. So before we really talk about what that means, there is a glaring question that comes up from this passage that's important for us to tackle, and that we are not going to tackle in its fullness today. But here's the question. Does God change his mind? Because if you read what we read today, it says Moses asks God to change his mind. In verse 14, what does it say? God changed his mind. But we believe that God is unchanging. Is it really Moses who's merciful here? And God is not? And Moses is the one who convinces God to be something different? Some would suggest that that's true, and they would use this passage to paint a different picture of God than what we believe of him. In many different ways. That either he doesn't know everything, or he's not loving, or he's not good, or he's not merciful, or that he changes. Now, as we read the passage, here's the important thing. We got to rewind just a little bit before we can answer that question. Does God change his mind, though? First of all, why? Here's my son, Wesley, was telling me, he was talking to Pastor Sean about something, and Pastor Sean, in response, asked him a question. And my son said, why do all you pastors do that? Why can't you just give us an answer? Why do you always answer my question with a question? So I'm sorry I'm going to do that. I'm going to answer this question with a question. Because before we can answer this, here's the important question. When we study, why is God coming to Moses? Why does God tell Moses what he's going to do? Why doesn't God just say, Moses, duck, and throw the lightning bolts? Right? If God's mind is set, why is he even telling Moses in the first place? Why is that? Go back to verse 7, which we didn't read. We read last week, not today. Go back to the beginning of what God says. And what is God's command to Moses in verse 7, go quickly down the mountain. He's telling Moses because he sees what his people are doing, and he wants Moses to do something about it. He calls Moses to act. See, when God utters judgments, they are not set in stone here, especially in the Old Testament. They are calls to repentance. They are opportunities for grace. So I know in adult Sunday school this morning, you guys talked about Jonah, right? And God sends Jonah to Nineveh, right? With the judgment. In 40 days, Nineveh will be destroyed. Was Nineveh destroyed in 40 days? No. Why? Did God change his mind? No. The people changed. Right? And what we see is not a God who changed, but a God who responds to his people. The whole book of Exodus begins in the same way. Why does God do anything for them at all? He comes to Moses, and the first thing he says to Moses is this: I have heard the cries of my people. So was God okay with them being slaves and then suddenly heard their cries and changed his mind and then responded? No, God responded to the cries of his people. Not in accordance with his will. That's what God wanted. Does God want to destroy his people here? No, of course not. He wants for them to live in the covenant. So he offers them an opportunity for grace. Do they deserve the punishment? Yes. And Moses believes that too. We're going to see that next week. But God, more importantly, offers them the opportunity for grace. So many of the prophets, if we read them, are God telling the people he's going to issue this judgment and destroy them. It is not a written in stone thing. God is trying to call them to change. If they respond to this, course correct, then something different can happen. God is both full of justice and wrath towards sin and full of mercy and grace at the same time. And those are always, they're not working in opposition. God's not seesawing back and forth between the two. They're always working hand in hand for God's will to be done. So why does he call Moses there? Why does he speak to Moses? Because he wants the people to change. And he needs someone to see the need for that change, because nobody at the bottom of the mountain sees it. So this is not a passage that we should walk away and see this wishy-washy change in God. Instead, this is a passage that we should read and we should say, what would it take for me to be like Moses? Because there's lots of people at the bottom of the mountain today that don't see the destruction that they're bringing upon themselves with their choices. And we, because we've been changed by grace, can see that. How do we stand in the gap for them and intercede for them in a way that leads them to the truth of God's mercy and grace and away from the reality of judgment that they are headed towards? We must become like Moses. And when Moses is told about this, go quickly, go change the circumstance, what does Moses do? What's the first thing he does? He goes to God. He talks to God first. He intercedes on the people's behalf because they don't know any better, because they don't know how to go to God for themselves, because they've been corrupted and can't see what he sees. So what God tells Moses is not an invitation for God or for Moses to judge the people. God doesn't want Moses to look down the mountain and shout at them about how terrible they are. It's an invitation for Moses to intercede in their lives, for someone to stand up for those who don't deserve someone to stand up for them. He intercedes for people who don't deserve it. That's what mercy is, when we don't get what we do deserve. They do deserve judgment. And Moses is not saying that they don't. But what Moses prays is a request for God to turn away from his anger. Not because it isn't right. Not because they don't deserve it. Moses appeals to the character of God because of who you are, God. Because this is better for your glory. We read this and know this is an opportunity for grace. So how does Moses intercede? That's the question that we have to ask. How can we become like Moses? What does Moses do here that we can do in our lives? Because there's plenty of people in our lives that are stuck in the same thing that those people at the bottom of the mountain were stuck in. So what does Moses do that each and every one of us here can do for someone else? Number one, Moses doesn't make it all about him. And here's what I mean by that. If we read verse 10 again. At the end of God's judgment, God tells Moses, I'm going to destroy this people and I'm going to start over with you. You're going to get all the promises. I'm going to build through you. And it would be very human of Moses to then, pop his collar and say, that sounds good. You're right. They're terrible. Let's get rid of them and start with me. Let's make it all about me. Moses doesn't do that. Moses sets aside himself. When you intercede for someone, it can never be about you. A lot of times you go to God for people because you're tired of the things in their lives. Because it's hard for you what's going on in their lives. And you want it to change for yourself. It's a prayer for someone else. It's really about you. That's not what Moses is doing. And that's not what we should do when we intercede for someone. We have to set aside ourselves and what we want. Which leads to number two. Moses seeks God's will. He's not seeking what he wants, nor is he seeking what the people want. He is ultimately seeking what God wants. He knows what God wants. God has told them and communicated with them what he wants. And he doesn't allow the corruption of the people to then distract them from what God has already told them is his will. And that's what he points out in what he's praying to God. You've reminded us of who you've been to Abraham, the promises you've made. You've shown us how good you are. You've told us what you want us to do. You want to lead us to the promised land and make us this people. Moses knows what God wants. And so what he's praying is not a change to that. He is praying for God's will to happen. Moses continues to seek God's will and not allow the corruption around him to distract him from it and ask for something else. Which leads to the third thing. It's not all about Moses. It's not about the people. Moses makes this prayer all about God. Notice, if we read these verses again, at no point does Moses try to defend the people. If you were trying to save someone from destruction, that's what Moses, that's not mince words, that's what Moses is doing here, right? You might say, but God, they don't know any better. But God, don't they deserve a second chance? But God, let me go down and let me tell them something different to change. Maybe I can change their mind. He doesn't say anything about who they are. All Moses does is talk about who God is. Verse 11, he talks about God's power. He says, remember your power, how you've delivered your people. In verse 12, he talks about God's reputation, God's glory, and how the enemies of his people and enemies of him would love for him to do this and say, look at how terrible God is. He led him out to the mountains in the wilderness and destroyed him there. Verse 13, he talks of God's faithfulness, the promises that God has made and has been keeping, and that Moses trusts he'll continue to keep. Moses uses God's character to demonstrate why he should turn from righteous anger and turn towards his mercy. Saving this undeserving people will display God's glory more than their destruction. The fourth thing that Moses does is he appeals to God's mercy. At the end of verse 12, Moses explicitly asks God to change from judgment to mercy. God's wrath, the anger we saw last week, was an appropriate response to the actions of the people. A holy, pure, just God cannot live in union with that kind of corruption. And Moses knows that. Again, what we read next will demonstrate Moses agrees with God on that. So he's not saying they deserve punishment. He's asking for mercy. He's asking for what they don't deserve. God's heart is not one of anger. It is one of compassion and love. Even the anger we saw last week flows out of that love. And so Moses appeals to that. And while we deserve the anger that our sin brings, his love and compassion drives his actions. And that same heart should drive us to pray. Not because, listen to this, not to pray for the people in your lives who deserve it. Because you'll probably have a hard time finding those people. Because they need it. And God's the only one who has it. So we intercede and ask for his mercy, which is not deserved. We're asking God to do what only he can do. Finally, Moses believes God will answer. He trusts that God is listening and answer. He believes that God will have mercy and not bring his judgment. And that's true. God acts upon this prayer. God doesn't want to destroy his people. He wants someone, anyone, to see the wrong and to stand up and say, hey, this is wrong, and we need to change. This is not who God called us to be. This is not the commitment we made to God, and we need to correct. He wants them to understand his love and to ask for it. He wants someone to care about his people as much as he cares about them. So God doesn't change his mind. God acts upon the faithful prayer of a faithful follower on behalf of a people that he loves. So as we've looked at this passage for a few weeks now, we've talked about what God has called a stiff-necked people, the rebellious. They refuse to follow his leading, and we can see that in ourselves and want to change that. We can easily see that in others. And we shake our heads at those people who can't see the terrible choices that they're making. But today, in this moment, I want to ask, have you been Moses? Have you stood up for those people that you shook your heads at? Did you think about someone last week, we talked about how stiff-necked they were, and spend the rest of the week praying for them to be healed, to be changed, to find God's mercy and follow his leading? Have you been moved by the loving, compassionate heart of God for those people that he loves and wants to pour his compassion on? I want to give you an example of what this looks like. One of the things that my sons and I love to do is go to baseball games. So we go to a lot of professional baseball games. And so this story really resonates with me because it's about a dad who brought his son to his first baseball game. This is Landon Cunningham. Young boy. It's his dad, Sean. Spring training game in 2016. Atlanta Braves, Pittsburgh Pirates. It's at Disney. That's where the Braves play their spring training games. And so we're down in Orlando. They're watching the first game, and Landon absolutely loves it. But then an outfielder, the Pirates, named Danny Ortiz, takes a big swing, and the bat slips out of his hand. And the bat goes hurtling towards the crowd. Now, if you were in the crowd and you saw a bat hurtling towards you, what are you going to do? Hey, look, everybody's ducking, everybody's dodging, moving back, but Landon's at the bottom of the screen. Not surprisingly, is on a phone. Right? He doesn't see the bat coming. Even his dad, who's right next to him, he's moved back, right? He's reacted. He sees the danger coming and has responded to it, just like everybody else. But then, Sean realizes the bat is headed straight for Landon. And he said he would do whatever it takes to protect his son. And he catches that bat the second before it hits his son in the face. That, I want you to look at that image. This is intercession, friends. This is what it looks like in our lives. We see the danger coming to people who, for whatever reason in their lives, are distracted or corrupted in a way that they cannot see it. And we stick our arms out to do whatever we can to protect them. Now, the truth is, what we're doing is calling upon the arms of their Father who loves them to stick His arm out to protect them, because most of the dangers they face, we can't do anything about. But the question before us today is this who you are being for the people in your lives? Are you willing to not just shout down the mountain and tell them how terrible they are? Just not point out how wrong they are and how foolish their decisions are and how they need to change, or just shake their heads from afar. Just say, I told them so. I told them what would happen. They didn't do anything. Are you willing to stand in the gap? Even if it feels like you're shouting into the wind. To ask the God of mercy and grace to stand in their way. Oswald Chambers writes in The Utmost for His Highest, God never gives us discernment in order that we may criticize, but that we may intercede. Our temptation when we see the faults of people is to criticize, is to judge. Let's be honest, we look at the world that we live in today and we see its brokenness, we see its flaws, we see how crazy it's become, and we see that God that we read last week, that anger, and we say, bring that. The world needs that. Just wipe it out, get rid of it. And we call for Jesus to come back and forget that what that's calling for is a judgment on a sinful people. End this world. Wipe all that out. And let's start again. And there's a promise that He's going to do that one day. But God is the one who gets to look at people's actions and judge. He's the one who gets to look at the world and judge. Not me. Not any of us. And God is not revealing to you the things that are going on in people's lives so that you can issue that judgment, so that you can criticize them, but so that you can intercede. He doesn't tell Moses this to judge them. He tells Moses so that there's someone that stands up for them and points them to the right way. We don't see the bat coming so we can yell at the batter for letting the bat slip. We don't see the bat coming so we can yell at the kid for not paying attention. We see it coming so we can hold our arm out. God doesn't make us aware of that wrong so we can judge, but so we can intercede. And so I'm going to call us to do that today. First of all, there are some of you, you're at the bottom of the mountain and you've seen the things that are wrong in your life. You know your mistakes. You're at that place where what you're doing is going to lead to that destruction. It leads to those consequences. It leads to that disruption in your life. Here's the good news for you today that Moses could not share with the Israelites, but that we can share today. Hebrews chapter 7, verse 25 and 26 says, therefore He, this is Jesus, is able once and forever to save those who come to God through Him. He lives forever to intercede with God on our behalf. He's the kind of high priest we need because He's holy and blameless, unstained by sin. He has been set apart from sinners and has been given the highest place of honor in heaven. Jesus is already interceding for you. And you don't need anybody but Him. if you come to him with that, he is already there and come to be that conduit of God's mercy into your life. All you have to do is go and ask him for today. He will show you that. Doesn't, forewarning, I'll give you the end of the story. It doesn't mean there aren't consequences for the choices you made, because there are. But it means there's grace that you don't deserve, that God has in abundance for you. So don't be stiff-necked and ignore the prodding of the Holy Spirit today to change the direction of your life, for Jesus to stand in the gap for you and lead you back to God's way. Now, there are people that we know who can never do that, who aren't in a place in their life where they can come to Jesus. Either because they don't see it, they don't know it, they're blind to it, or that maybe they don't see anything wrong with who they are and what they do. So we're going to do something today. I asked the worship team is going to come up. When the worship team plays, as they're playing, I'm going to challenge you to be Moses today. And to not just say that we're Moses, but I want you to actually, we're going to call you to do something here. First of all, if you're in that place where you need to come to Jesus today, and you know there's something in your life, you need somebody to intercede for you, our prayer team's going to be up here, and you come to them, and they will pray for you today for the needs in your life. But here's what I mean call today. I'm going to call those of you who are ready to intercede for somebody in your life to come forward and bring them to the throne of grace. I don't want you to come here for yourself today. I want you to come to God like Moses on behalf of the people in your life that are in desperate need of him. Maybe they don't need Jesus and need to see him. Need to come to know who he is. Maybe they've wandered away and they've allowed sin to corrupt their hearts. And they broke that covenant just like the people here did. Maybe they have no idea. You can see it. You know what they're headed towards, but they don't. And need to hold that arm out today so that God can protect them. I trust and believe that God is putting people on your hearts today, just as he is on mine, who are in desperate need of him. Will you be the one that God uses, like Moses in their lives, to wake them up, to see who he really is, to protect them from what's coming, so that they can see the grace and mercy and love of God in abundance? Let us stop shouting down the mountain in judgment, friends. And let's start bringing the lost to the throne of grace, to the only one who can change, to the only one who can save, to the only one who can lead them from where they are to where he has called them to be. So I call you to come to the altar today. Bring them here. Bring them to the Father. And believe as Moses did that God will answer, that God will respond, that God will move. As the worship team plays, bring, intercede. Let's call on the God of mercy and grace to work in the lives of the people that he loves and that we love as well. Come before his throne today.